have no fear. Have no fear. Easier said than done, right? You see, the biggest block that most people face is fear. You know, fear paralyzes a person. Fear freezes a person. It stops people from being happy, from being themselves, and from achieving what it is they wish to achieve big things, to achieve dreams, goals. You know, all the beings that really achieve massive things in the world, they either have no fear or they're able to control this thing called fear. The two biggest fears that most people have are the fear of death, which I would say is the biggest fear, and then there is the fear of what other people think, the fear of other people's opinions, judgments, assessments on you or on the things that you do. Now, I've heard it said that actually it's the fear of what other people think is the biggest fear, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's the fear of death, and I'll explain why. Well, first of all, what is the fear of death? The fear of death is when you believe, when you identify yourself as just being this body, and as just being the mind and those bundle of thoughts in the mind, beliefs, opinions. It's when you believe yourself to just be the personality. The word personality comes from the Greek word persona, which means mask. Most people say, I am my personality, but the personality is the mask. You know, it's your character. Well, who else? Where else have we heard character? In a movie, in a play. You see, the personality is just the mask, is the front that most people wear. It is this kind of layer or this skin that people wear. And behind that is the true self, who you really are. Beyond the personality. The personality is not something you were born with. The personality are character traits that you develop via social conditioning, learned behavior, learned patterns of thinking, learned responses, learned reactions, learned perspectives and perceptions on things. And when you strip all of that away, what you are left with is the true self. And the true self is unique. It has a unique flavor to it. There is a unique energy. But the only way to get to that is you have to get rid of the personality, the persona. You have to take off the mask. Get rid of the ego. That is the only way. So when most people identify themselves as the mask, as the ego, the persona, and as the body, and as the thoughts in the mind, which is the same as the persona, or same as the ego, when you believe that that's all that you are, then you believe that when you die, that then it's the end of you. But we only leave the body. We don't die. There is only a leaving of the body, and that essence that you are, that goes beyond the body, mind and persona, is the true self. And when you get more connected with that and you realize that, and you move into the experience of that, then the fear of death seems to go away, because you realize that the dropping of the body, the leaving of the body, and the dropping of the personality is not the end. It is like shedding a skin that was never really you in the first place. It's like taking off a costume in a play. So when you realize your identity beyond that, the fear of death goes. It goes away. Because there's nothing to fear anymore. You realize that there is no death. And this is tied in and connected to the fear of what other people think. They seem like maybe two things that are unrelated, but they are very closely related. And I'll explain this with a story, a true story, of a friend of the family who had a brain tumor. Now, fast forward maybe a couple of years after that, this guy was at work and he was enjoying his lunch break, and he was reading his daily paper, and a colleague came in quite rushed, quite panicked, and basically said to the guy, look, he chucked some keys on the table. He says, look, this needs doing now, we need to get this done, so on, so on. So the guy who had had the brain tumor before, who was sat reading the paper, didn't even look at the guy and just slowly moved the keys over back to him and said, I'm on my break. Didn't say it with any kind of sternness in his voice, he just said it in a relaxed way. He just said, I'm on my break. And the guy was, the guy who had come in with the keys and chucked them on the table, what could he say to that? So he walked straight back out the door and went. And the people that were around him, they were a bit taken back by this, because the way that he just did that, the way that he kind of stood his ground in such a calm, relaxed way, such a confident way, like being completely fearless. Because most people, well, I don't want to lose my job, so I'll just do what I'm told. Or they'll argue against something. But he did neither. He just was so relaxed. He just said, no, I'll do it after my break. So he obviously wasn't bothered about that person's opinion or anybody else's opinion. And he wasn't bothered about the boss's opinion, potential of being sacked or having some kind of warning or a strike or whatever it is that they do at these workplaces. And it's easy to see why he was like that, because when you rewind a couple of years previous, he was, he went through a whole process of being diagnosed with a fatal brain tumor. And for 6 months he slowly deteriorated, and he worried about it, and it was on his mind, and then I think eventually the last sort of month or so he ended up going into the hospital, and this was kind of like supposed to be his last month, before he died. And he was sat one day in his hospital bed, and he looked over to the left, and to the left-hand side of him was an ex-priest, and the priest was also on his deathbed. So he kind of stopped and kind of pondered for a while, and then he looked over to the other side, and on the other side was a ex-successful businessman, and he was also on his deathbed. Now this is funny because it sounds like some kind of parable, but this is a true story. So, so then he kind of sat there and he contemplated, and he had this massive realization. And his realization was that no matter what you do in life, no matter who you become, no matter what your status is, no matter whether you are a part of a religion, or whether you become a successful, wealthy person, or whether you're just your average Joe working, death, or leaving the body, will come to us all. It will come to us all, and before you know it, it will be there. Now, to the mind, this is very depressing. The mind doesn't want to focus on that, doesn't want to think about that. It just wants to try and put it to the back of the mind and doesn't want to confront it. But that comes at a price. When we don't confront something and we put it to the back of the mind, it is never forgotten. It lurks in our, in the dark recesses of the mind, and it plagues us, it torments us in some way. And, so anyway, he had this realization, and it was very powerful for him because he used to take things so seriously. He used to take his job so seriously. He used to take what other people said to him so seriously. He used to take seriously whether he was successful at things. And, being in that position, thinking he was going to die in a couple of weeks, he realized that all of that stuff was meaningless, really. Meaningless. And, since that point on, he now lives in the moment and he appreciates each moment. He appreciates everything he has, everything he gets, but he's not trying to hold on to it because he realizes one day it will all go. And he's not trying to impress anybody. How powerful is that? Just think of the magnitude of what that means to really not want to impress anybody. Doesn't mean that you don't treat people nice, but just to not have that need to kind of be liked by others, to not have that need for admiration or to impress anybody or to kind of show everybody, hey, look how good I am, I'm a hard worker, or I can achieve this or create that. Now he does everything for himself. He doesn't put any pressure on himself. It's not about impressing anybody else. He does something because he wants to do it. And he just is himself. You see, when you fear what other people think, what you will tend to do is you will modify your behavior. You will modify who you are in certain situations because you're scared that if you just genuinely be who you are, people won't like it. Now, as I've said before again at the beginning, who you are is not the personality, it's not the persona. It's not likes and dislikes and preferences and all this kind of stuff and habits. It's none of that stuff. That's the mask. That's the conditioning. What you are is that unique energy, is that unique vibration, is that unique consciousness that is at the core of your being, that is behind the persona, behind the mind, behind the mask. Who's behind the mask? That's who you are. So when you allow the persona to drop away, what happens is more of your true self steps forward. More of your true self is visible. And then you become natural. You become more natural than anything. Such a natural thing. You're just yourself. You're not trying to impress anybody. You don't want anybody's admiration necessarily. Yeah, of course, somebody says something nice to you, treats you in a nice way. That's fantastic, great. But then if somebody doesn't, you're not affected by it because you don't need it. You see? There's a difference. So that all came from overcoming the fear of death. Realizing that you extend beyond the body. You can understand that. You can understand it. If you contemplate upon it and understand it, and maybe even meditate upon it, like some of the Buddhists, one of the Buddhist practices that they do is to meditate upon death. You can do that and it will shift you to a new realization. Or what happens for some people is they have to go through some kind of traumatic experience, like a near-death experience, for them to really shift and move into that. Or maybe a psychedelic experience like ayahuasca or mushrooms or some kind of psychedelic. But you don't need a psychedelic, and you don't need a situation to happen to you to come to that realization. Contemplate it, understand it, and it's the understanding that shifts your perception. It's the understanding that propels you to a whole new level, that frees you, that will remove the fear. And when you're fearless, when you have no fear because you don't fear death, everything is possible. There will be no blocks. There will be no limitations in your own mind. You will be able to do anything, because the limitations are in your mind, and that's the only place that they are. They're just in your head. Remove the fear and you remove the limitations, and then everything is possible.